Donna Lieberman from the New York Civil Liberties Union, thank you so much for joining us here on New York Now with your perspective this week. I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad to be able to talk to you. Thanks.
So Donna, let's start with what your group does, and I think it's pretty obvious. It's the New York chapter of the ACLU. Your entire job is to fight for the rights and the constitutional liberties that people have in this country. So let's talk about the news of the week, which is the protests that we've seen in cities everywhere across the state and around the country. Specifically, I want to start with a warning from the president, because I think that it set off some civil liberties alarms from some people. He said that if governors and mayors don't essentially diffuse these protests and every situation, basically, that he will maybe send in the army to diffuse it for them. Donna, what are the implications of that? Because for me, it seems like that may not even be legal, but of course, I don't know. And you're an attorney, so what's your perspective on that?
You know, he has no right to send in the army. Let's remember, this is the guy who, was elected, on the claim of getting rid of big government and draining the swamp. He is absolutely the opposite of that. He is an authoritarian. I'll watch my words. His threats simply perpetrate division and fear and hate. And I just hope we make it through, despite this man and the people around him. He doesn't do this alone. From Mitch McConnell on down, up and around.
Can I ask you about the protests? Because that's, I don't want to say the other side of this, but it's kind of the other side of the conversation here, where we have these peaceful protests during the day and they turn chaotic at night and at some point. And from a civil liberties perspective, obviously you have the right to protest. We have First Amendment rights in this country, but is there a line when these protests go from being something that's protected under the Constitution to something that is prosecutable, something that is criminal, I guess? Where is that line?
Yeah. So I think it's important that we recognize that the right to protest is fundamental. And we can never treat it as if it's not fundamental to our democracy. And you have the right to engage in peaceful protest. The tradition of civil disobedience is deeply ingrained in the civil rights history of our nation. It is important. When people engage in looting and violence, which I believe pales by comparison to the police abuse and violence that we have seen in recent days and in the events that led up to the protest today. I think we have to understand the rage that is and the pain that is boiling up within the Black community, and within many in the white communities and other communities of color as well. So repealing 50A in New York is something that's a no-brainer. It's got to happen yesterday. The legislature's in session. They have to stop diddling with around the details. They have to make sure that it happens effectively so that there's transparency. And that's just a step. It's not the end of the line,
So on repealing 50A, there's this question of, and I don't know if it's actually a question, but the police unions say they don't want 50A repealed because they fear that people may target their officers and that their addresses and identifying information may be revealed. And I know—
Baloney. Nobody wants the private information of police officers. And that's redactable, nobody's looking for that. What we want is the disciplinary records. We don't want their medical records. We don't want their days off. We want their disciplinary records. When they've been accused of wrongdoing, found to have engaged in wrongdoing, we want to know it. Ramarley Graham's mom, Connie Neat, has a right to know what's being done to hold the guy who killed her son in his grandmother's bathroom accountable.
So the legislature's in session next week. It's something that we're going to be watching because they very well may repeal 50A next week when they're back in Albany. Until then, Donna Lieberman from the New York Civil Liberties Union, thank you so much for joining us here on New York Now this week.
Thanks for having me.